The US House of Representatives has approved a bill that would force TikTok's Chinese owners to sell the app. It calls for the parent company ByteDance to offload its shares within 6 months. Supporters say Chinese ownership poses a national security risk, but TikTok denies ties with the government in Beijing. Alan Fisher has the story.
The bill is passed, and without the objection, the motion to reconsider is laid on the table.
The moment the US House of Representatives took a step towards banning TikTok, the Chinese owners of the social media app, used by around 170 million Americans, would have 6 months to sell its US operation or face a nationwide ban. Critics argue the company works too closely with the Chinese Communist Party and could seize US user data and even push a political agenda.
You wouldn't allow a radio tower owned by the Chinese to be put up right in the middle of Washington, D.C., and then allow it to just put out Chinese propaganda. You'd probably complain about that. That's exactly what TikTok can be used for.
Tell Congress to not ban TikTok.
TikTok saw the possible ban coming, and US content creators mobilized to object. Some lawmakers think the bill doesn't address key issues.
You're going to tell Americans they can't put a piece of software on their computer. They can't go to certain websites that the president designates.
President Joe Biden says it could be a national security risk.
If they pass it, I'll sign it.
The Chinese government, before the motion passed, criticized the idea of a sell-off or a ban.
Although the U.S. has not found any evidence of TikTok threatening national security, it has never stopped going after TikTok.
Steps to ban any social media platform could face court challenges over the issue of freedom of speech. But before that, this would have to pass the Senate, and there are no plans even to give it a hearing, never mind a vote. One First Amendment expert says the idea of government going after social media should chill everyone.
I think it's a terrible bill. I think that it runs roughshod over the First Amendment, and that it is a kind of gift to authoritarians all over the world who will use this as a pretext to crack down on their own citizens' access to information and ideas and media from abroad.
When President Donald Trump issued an executive order banning TikTok, but rescinded it when the courts ruled it had not been established it was a clear and present national security threat, which makes it hard to see the app disappearing from American phones anytime soon. Alan Fisher, Al Jazeera, Capitol Hill.
And TikTok CEO Xu Zichu has responded to the vote, urging users to help keep the service running in the US.
This legislation, if signed into law, will lead to a ban of TikTok in the United States. Even the bill sponsors admit that that's their goal. This bill gives more power to a handful of other social media companies. We believe we can overcome this together. I encourage you to keep sharing your stories. Share them with your friends. Share them with your family. Share them with your senators. Protect your constitutional rights. Make your voices heard.
Let's bring in our China correspondent, Katrina Yu. She's joining us live from Beijing. And Katrina, how has the Chinese government responded?
Well, the Chinese government has weighed in, accusing the U.S. of bullying Chinese tech firms, including TikTok and ByteDance. It says that this is an act of hegemony that undermines confidence in international business and that it will eventually backfire on Washington. Now, just going back to TikTok CEO Xu Zichu's statement, he did go on following that to say that the biggest victims of this forced sale would be Americans. He says that 300,000 American jobs are on the line here, and that this will also endanger the income of many, many small businesses that rely on TikTok. So the reaction here so far has been quite strong, and we'll have to wait and see what the next steps could be.
Yeah, TikTok saying that 5 million small business owners in the US use TikTok. Now, TikTok's parent company ByteDance, as we've been reporting, would have to seek approval from Chinese officials to complete a forced divestiture. So why is Beijing opposed to that?
Well, Beijing has seen sort of this coming. This is not the first time that TikTok has been targeted by US politicians. In 2020, Beijing, as a response, started to put in place some regulations to stop the sale of any critical technology. Now, the secret source behind TikTok is not the app itself. It's actually the code or the algorithms designed by developers in China and is owned by ByteDance, the parent company. So China has put in place regulations that say that any critical proprietary technology that Beijing considers critical to national interest here in China, it requires Beijing's approval or for a sale to obtain a license. So whether or not Beijing will actually allow the sale to go through, that is a whole other question altogether. And of course, for ByteDance, this is also a big business dilemma. For ByteDance, most of its operations, most of its profits are made here in China, it's true, but TikTok is a very significant portion of its business, about 20%, and it's also the fastest growing portion of its business. So whether or not ByteDance will let TikTok go willingly seems unlikely.
Katrina, thank you very much for that. Katrina Yu, live in Beijing. Well, that legislation isn't a done deal yet. It still has to pass the US Senate. But if it does come into effect, TikTok would be removed from app stores and internet service providers would block web access. People who already have it on their phones would still be able to use it, but they wouldn't get updates or be able to download it again in the future. This could be avoided if ByteDance sells TikTok to a non-Chinese owner. But this would require authorization from the Chinese government. Last year, the Commerce Ministry said it would firmly oppose any forced sale of the app. Well, let's get more on this now. We're joined by Andy Mok, Senior Research Fellow with the Center for China and Globalization. There's a think tank based in Beijing, and he's joining us from Changde in China. Thank you for your time. Just how much does this latest move strain relations between the US and China?
Well, I think this is certainly going to worsen the relationship between China and the United States. But I think more importantly, we have to look at this in the larger context, that this is only one episode of what some are calling American paranoia. And this is going to have, I think, very troubling implications for the United States if it continues down this road. We look at Chinese electric vehicles, port automation technology, LiDAR, the technology that's used for autonomous vehicles, space exploration, that if the U.S. continues down this path, it may very well end up an isolated technological backwater.
Well, you know, the bill was passed by the majority of the House of Representatives, and the Republican who co-authored the bill said that the U.S. couldn't take the risk of having a dominant news platform in America controlled by a company that is beholden to the Chinese Communist Party. Are those concerns legitimate? I mean, Chinese companies are subject to laws requiring them to share data with the government on request, aren't they?
Well, I think broadly speaking, I think that is correct. But we also have to look at what TikTok has done. And again, I think this is more broadly a pattern of paranoia by the United States, in that these concerns are being overplayed. But in the specific instance of TikTok, my understanding is they've met with CFIUS, the U.S. government organization responsible for evaluating these types of threats. They've set up a separate data center in the United States managed by American entities to exactly address these issues. And the U.S. government has not responded. So this would seem to suggest that they might not be acting in good faith here. And I think this raises another question, which is an ideological one, because what the government is doing here is implying that the American people are not capable of distinguishing between truth and misinformation. And also, I think what has really alarmed and even terrified some American politicians that are ardent supporters of Israel is TikTok's ability to deliver the unfiltered truth about what some describe as a genocide in Gaza. And this threatens the information monopoly that allows some of these supporters to act with impunity. And I think they're afraid of being held to account. And this is another motivation for this TikTok ban.
Yeah, and certainly, you know, to your point, we have seen on TikTok that there have been many more let's say pro-Palestinian voices than those who support what Israel is doing in Gaza. But again, when you're talking about the efforts that TikTok has undertaken to protect users' data, a recent investigation by the Wall Street Journal, just from January, it found that the system was still porous, with data being unofficially shared between TikTok in the US and ByteDance in China. So again, isn't the US right to be worried?
Well, I think the US, any government, should be concerned about data security and cybersecurity. But this is not uniquely a TikTok issue. So whether you're Meta, whether you're Alphabet with Google and Facebook platforms, any consumer-facing platform that collects user information is at risk. So certainly, I think measures need to be taken. No company is perfect. We also have to recognize that any large company, especially a young and fast-growing one, certainly can have breakdowns in procedures, can have bad apples. That certainly can happen, but I would not necessarily then say that this is broadly indicative of a particular problem unique to TikTok.
All right, Andy Mok joining us live from Changde in China. Thank you for your time.
Thank you for having me.